Great. Well, this is really, I haven't been here in a while, and it's just really exciting what I've been studying right now. It stemmed from there's a Christian ministry called the Bible Project, and I've been using their material for a men's fellowship that I lead. And the study that they did was on the city, and it opened my eyes to see more about the city and the origins of it. And I really wanted to track it down because we know ultimately we're going to be living in a city on the earth. Um, but it didn't originate that way. I mean, God planted Eden as a sanctuary and as a place for Adam and Eve, where he was in the center of all that. But things changed. And I wanted to find out who was the first person that built a city. Why? What was their motivation? And we're going to look at two men first, and that's Cain and Nimrod. And Cain, and this is in Genesis chapter 4, and it starts in verse, let's see right here, 13. And when I read the scriptures now, I really try to hear the voice of the person speaking, because they had emotion and they had feeling. And Cain was a wild orangutan. We read in scripture, he had a lot of emotion and a lot of stuff behind him. So when I'm reading this, I said, okay, I want to get into Cain's head here and what was going on with him. And this is after he killed his brother. And Cain said unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. His whole attitude is like, it's all your fault, God. And just read how many times I and me and this and that. And meanwhile, what he did to his brother is like totally, it's totally out there. But it's all about him. And God, I think the way God speaks to Cain and how he approaches him is like no other person in the Bible. But it said, the Lord said unto him, therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son. There's a lot in here. And I'm thinking about what is motivating Cain. Well, when it says that he dwelt in the land of Nod, Nod literally means to wander. So to dwell in the land of Nod means to live in a wandering life because he left that presence of God. And I thought, he could have prayed to God. He could have called on to God, but he chose not to do that. He didn't want to have anything to do with God. He hated God, just like he hated his brother. So he built a city. And in my mind, I always thought of a city like, I live in Manhattan. I mean, there's Babylon, there are Egypt, all these different cities. But literally, a city in the Bible could have been huts, it could have been homes, but they had a wall built around them. So what was Cain's thinking? Again, God told him that he'd put a mark on him and protect him. But when you're evil, the things that you do to people, you project and you think they're going to do the same thing. So he built a wall to protect himself from the outside world. That was his whole thinking. And it's really amazing of how when you're evil and you have that kind of a heart, it's all about you and it's all centered about you and to protect yourself and what you need and what you want. But he continued, I thought, to wander. Even though he built that city, he still had that wall around his heart. He was continually wandering, even though he lived in a city that he thought was going to protect him. So Going on here, I wanted to find the place here where it talks about um, Cain said that from thy face shall I be hid. And I thought about, like mother, like father, like son, because back in Genesis 3:8, Adam and Eve hid themselves from the presence of God. So there's something about our own nature, about hiding ourselves and not feeling safe and not feeling secure. Um, I want to find the place here because it explains more about this city. And let's see, I've got so much I want to say to you guys. So in Genesis 4 now, we're going to read a little more about city life and what's coming from that. So in Genesis 4, and we look at verse 20, it says that Ada bare Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal Cain was Nama or Nama. Names tell us a lot more of a deeper meaning of what's going on. And Jabal literally means flowing as a stream, water, water flowing or a conduit. Jubal means stream or a ram's horn. And you think of that horn that was blown at the time of Jubilee, it was a ram's horn that was blown to celebrate a release of freedom. And he was the father of music. So the father of music did not originate from any believer. It originated from the son of Cain, okay? And Tubal Cain means flowing from Cain or the image of Cain. So we're getting this image of Cain that's going to be stamped in the city. Man's creations all flowing from his own image. That desire that's driven in there to find rest and satisfaction that's in the work of his own hands. So this is how the cities originated as a form of protection from the world because of Cain's fear of anybody else coming in to attack him. And if you don't have God, man's most intimate things, and I know as an artist, are the arts. The arts express the soul life of who you are, your desires. So it is a form of a sanctuary. I know from artists and being with artists and musicians that you can make it into your own God and into your own sanctuary. So this is all the life that's coming from the city. Now this builds even deeper because we're going to go into Nimrod. And Nimrod, his name in Hebrew is Marad, and it means to rebel. In the Syrian or the Sumerian, when we talk about Babel, it is the gate of the god. So we're going to look first at Genesis 10. And in 10:8, it says, and Cush begat Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one in the earth. But when it says that, he was a mighty one, powerful. Actually, this says this in the Jerusalem Targum. And the Targum is the Hebrew translation into Aramaic. He was powerful in hunting and in wickedness before the Lord. So that's where his power was. So he builds a city and he puts his stamps, his qualities, his character into the city that he builds, which is Babel or Babylon. But again, it means in Sumerian, the gate of the god. But I find it interesting that the Hebrew always gets to the closer meaning, and it means confusion. And he is going to unite all men in rebellion to God. So let's read a little bit more about this. In Genesis 11, and in 4-8. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach onto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down. Whenever it refers to God, he's coming down to look at the city of men. Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. So let us make us a name. Is very interesting. It's making an independence from God. In Genesis 12:2, as a note, it says, God will make Abraham name great and a great nation. Let me go right into it. Genesis 12:2, just right by there. What he says, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And that blessing that Abraham gives extends to all of us because it's going to unite all people through the Messiah. So what Nimrod is doing is he's building this tower, and I can't find the note that I have, but it was from Josephus, and Josephus gave a little more interesting information about this Tower of Babel, because they were all familiar at the time with the flood. They knew about the flood wiping them out. But Josephus made a statement, I think it's in his book of Antiquities, that what Nimrod was doing was they were afraid that something like this was going to happen again. And he built this Tower of Babel, and they're thinking that if they built it high into the heavens, that if a flood came, they could be protected. So again, it's a hatred from God, and God's going to attack us. God's going to destroy us. So let us build a city. But meanwhile, I'm thinking in people's minds, what the hell do you think you're doing? I mean, if there's a flood or a power force, hit the base and the whole thing comes down, you know? So whatever man imagines and wants to do, it's like you're not getting the whole story, the whole picture here. So the Tower of Babel is uniting all men in rebellion against God to make a name for themselves, again, a famous name, and to create this city that's what is it built out from Cain? It was built from fear. It was built to finding a place of sanctuary. With Nimrod, again, it was to make a name, a famous name for ourselves that was outside of that line of Abraham, where God is going to unite all men. He's going to unite them in rebellion. So there's a real contrast between all that. And then I thought about Abraham, who had a totally different heart than Cain, a totally different heart than Nimrod, that wasn't full of that fear. They had so much fear, anxiety, and pride and arrogance. It's just so overwhelming what people do to themselves. They have to prove themselves. Where Abraham was at peace with God, he didn't have to prove himself. He didn't have to find this sanctuary that was made for men. But what does it say in contrast to that? In Hebrews 11, and I'm going to go to that. It talks about Abraham's heart, which was so much more tender and so much more gentle and kinder. Because those guys never found peace. They never found a sanctuary. It's not there without God. It's just not there. But in Hebrews 11:8, it gives us a little more information of how Abraham was seeking a city in a very different way. It says that by faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out not knowing whither he went. And it says later on here in verse 10, well, actually, read even verse 9. It says, by faith, he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. He sought it by faith, not by fear, not by having to prove to get a name above God, but he sought it in faith from God. And he went out, it says, he was a wanderer too, but not a wanderer like Cain was. He was a wandering because he did it in faith when God told him to go out, that there would be a city. In the Berean literal Bible, it says, for he was awaiting the city, having foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And that word for builder is technitis or technititis, something like a disease, but it's not technitis, and it means architect and designer. The root word for that is tekton, and it means carpenter. Isn't that interesting? That he looked at it, the rabbis looked at Jesus as a carpenter and that kind of a career with contempt. Because remember, the comment in the Gospels, is not this the carpenter's son? It was like, but a carpenter, of all the careers that he could have picked, Jesus, he was a carpenter. And a carpenter it's a craft. He chose something that involved planning, calculation, and the skill of a craftsman. And I thought that Jesus Christ is a craftsman working with God, God who is the architect and the designer and the fabricator of all life, because he's going to build a city, an entirely different city that makes Cain and Nimrod's city look like an anthole. So we get a glimpse of this, and I'm not getting into this, but in the city of David, in Jerusalem, there was that temporary place that David had. Solomon also had a city that when the Queen of Sheba saw it, she said she was just taken, she just had no breath in her. Because again, it was originating with God. But unfortunately, the human nature in us is, we build a city, but it falls apart at some place. Different than Cain and Nimrod that made it after their own image. But we need that city that God ultimately builds, that the Messiah is connected to. And look at Psalms chapter 40. And in Psalms chapter 40, and this all encouraged me so much because I thought, how much are we like Abraham? That we're looking for a better place. We're looking for a better city where God is the source. God is the designer and the architect. That is our permanent home. So we're like wanderers to a certain extent on this earth. If we go to North Carolina, if we retire in Florida, wherever we may be, they're all temporary places of habitation. But we're looking for a much better place, like Abraham, that we can dwell in. And in Psalms chapter 40, listen to what it says in verse 1. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry. He put me up also out of an horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock and established my goings. And he hath put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. Many shall see it and fear and shall trust in the Lord. And that's a great verse, but that wasn't the verse that I was looking for. I was looking for a verse that talked about the city of God. See if I can find that here. Let's see here. I wrote down the wrong one. But there is a city that it talks about on Mount Zion and how God is going to have a city. So I got to share that with you, find that somewhere else here, but I did put that down, unfortunately. I can't find the exact thing. But the city, again, that's in the future, that's coming, it reflects the beauty, the characteristics, the glory of God that we're going to share in the future. I also looked at Matthew chapter 5. And Matthew chapter 5 talks about a city again. Let's see here. And in 5, and we have the right verses here. In 13 and 14, it says, "Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid." So it compares the city again. The pagans, they used the hill or the high places for sacrifices to their gods. And it says that this city is the city of God. We are in that city of God. The city in the world is the place that's created for man. It's man taking his life, his own hands, independently from God, like Nimrod and Cain did. And it's his expression of rebellion. And that's in contrast again to Eden, where God is at the center of this place. And man is what? Second in command, managing God's creation. That's how it was in Eden. So there's a new Jerusalem coming in the age to come. And that's in the book of Revelation. And look in Revelation chapter 21. And in Revelation 21, it says in verses, see here, 1 to 3, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God." So again, it's God in the center of the city. So our ultimate destination is like Abraham. No more wandering in tents, not a temporary home in North Carolina or in Florida, but an eternal city where we are given full protection, safety, and all the activities, the life, the art, the relationships, the food, the worship. And it's not flowing from man or flowing from Cain, but it's flowing from the center of God's life that's pouring into our life, into this fantastic city that we have to look forward to. So that's basically what I wanted to share on.